Hey there, everyone. It's Kristi with an episode of An Atheist Asks, and sometimes I just do videos that are asking general questions, but I also use this series to talk to YouTubers about their experience on YouTube, and in particular, people from the atheist community and the feminist community, liberal community, because I think it's interesting, I guess, as a YouTube creator, for me to hear about the experiences of other YouTube creators. And also, I would hope that for those of you thinking about starting your own channel, that these kind of videos give you an insight into what you can expect or why people make YouTube videos and how they find the experience. So I've got on the channel today the person behind the YouTube channel, Garrett, who very recently had a lot of activity around a response video to Armoured Skeptic. But in this talk, we're going to first start with his background and learn a bit more about him, and then come to that topic a little bit later on. So yeah, what should we call you?
Well, I chose the name Garrett because it's a name that's associated with two different sort of major feminists of the past that I really admire, and it's a male sounding name, so that's why I chose that name. But you can call me Dan if you want.
All right, Dan. Well,
Yep.
welcome to the channel, and I'm so excited to have you. And I've been, really excited about your channel and the content you've been making. But before we get into your videos, I think it's interesting to know your backstory a little bit. And so, two questions that I often ask people when they come on the show is to tell me a bit. Well, one question is always to tell me a bit about how you came to your atheism, but maybe let's start with how you came to feminism.
Okay, well, my mother was a second wave feminist, and I was basically raised in an environment of that sort of activism. I attended my first few marches while still a fetus, and attended many more while a toddler and a young child and stuff. I've since moved away from sort of second wave goals and second wave stances, and kind of rejected some of the more problematic stuff within second wave, and that came about because of conversations I had with a friend of mine who was sort of against transphobia, and he sort of pointed out to me examples in the second wave of transphobic attitudes and anti-sex work attitudes and stuff like that, and just how that those types of attitudes aren't pragmatic, that they don't really work, and that those sort of issues shouldn't really be viewed through a moral lens as much as actually just trying to reduce harm to people and make women safe and stuff like that. So yeah, I've always been around it. I moved away from sort of feminist activism in my 20s when I was working on my sort of career and stuff. But in recent years, I think what's brought me back is all the stuff that's happening on the internet, the sort of gender culture war thing, that I thought that there's not enough informational content out there, and there's too much sort of just bare bones opinions and stuff, that I felt that it'd be good to get more voices that actually have sort of research on their side and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I think, in some of the comments on your video about the reading you've done. And so do you want to talk a little bit about, like the background you have and yourself, you being an autodidact, it sounds like. You did do a gender course.
It's a great term to use, because I don't, like I said to you, I didn't study feminism or gender studies at university, but I'm the kind of person that always researches. I never stop. If I'm not working, I will have like news on in the background and be like researching something, whether it be like, at the moment I'm doing a lot of research into Islam for a series that I'm working on. But yeah, I love research, and I think that's one of my main passions in life. So yeah, while I totally respect people with degrees, I don't have a relevant degree myself, but I do have a lot of experience in learning about this stuff. Yeah.
And do you want to maybe explain a little bit about the difference you see in sort of maybe more opinion books that are meant to convey ideas and scholarly work versus in the feminist community? Because I think people who aren't that into feminism probably don't understand the amount of scholarship behind it. So can you maybe say a little bit about how much there is, and the scholarly things that you've drawn on to help you inform your worldview?
One of the things I mentioned briefly in my Armoured Skeptic video is that these three sort of academic fields of women's studies, gender studies, and feminist studies are really considered quite cutting edge within the social sciences, humanities sort of sphere, because they're really on the cusp of what's called the post-disciplinary argument, which is where the feminist studies should move from being a discipline to being what's called a post-disciplinary discipline. And so there's a lot of and it's a highly sort of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary field. So it's really quite respected, and that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't get. They think people just assume that it's a bunch of sort of kooks sitting around just dreaming stuff up, and that's not the case at all. That it's really heavily based on a lot of research, a lot of thinking. So especially the third wave, I think there's been a surge, especially in the last 10 years, real surge in academic prowess and academic respectability in that. One of the things I want to talk about, I'm going to do a history of women's rights series at some point later this year. One of the things I was going to talk about in that is that second wave didn't have as much academic, well, there was an academic presence during second wave, but the activists didn't really, well, it didn't speak to what they were concerned about. People like, oh God, what's her name? Germaine Greer. She was talking about stuff like women shaving their legs and things. Whereas people like my mother were out trying to get women into office environments and government and trying to get more female gynecologists and trying to reduce sexualization of women in media and stuff. So they were looking at this stuff like the female eunuch and thinking, well, yeah, she's got some interesting ideas, but doesn't really reflect what I want, Whereas I think in third wave, that's not the case anymore. I think in third wave, we've got ideas like intersectionality coming out of the academic fields. Like intersectionality was first coined by a African-American feminist, and the term third wave was also coined by an African-American feminist. So, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out of academia now.
Yeah, I think the role of second wave in a lot of was in breaking those barriers. And I'm thinking of a story I heard from a woman who was a sociologist, and when she was doing her PhD work in sociology, she was coming up with her first idea. She went to her potential supervisor and said, "I'd like to do the sociology of housework." And he just said that there's no such thing. I mean, why would you waste your time on the sociology of housework? And she's like, well, because it takes up a lot of women's time. So
yeah.
Just having the awareness that those kinds of issues existed, I think is probably the most important contribution that second wave made. And then that opened up the door to the welcoming of a lot of intersectionality and third wave feminists. So when I look back at my PhD experience in the UK, I started my PhD in 2004, and I joined the Women in Politics groups of the Political Studies Association, and there were 6 of us, and we just we have a panel, and we have 4 papers, and there would be maybe 7 or 8 people in the audience, or maybe 7 or 8 people in the room. But in the time that I then became the co-convener and left, I mean, it was much greater, much broader. We had a lot more male scholars coming in wanting to collaborate with women who had expertise in feminist theory and gender related issues on candidacy, because they had data, but they didn't have the theory. And of course, a lot of the theorists aren't really confident with their numbers, but we have a lot of behavioralists as well. So yeah, I think just having that presence of experts to draw upon and then networking you're seeing the fruits of that really paying off in this sort of generation.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you asked about, the difference between the more academic scholarly writers and the less academic and scholarly writers. And in my experience, it's been that even the less academic writers they've written very intelligently, very eloquently, and have, a lot of research and facts behind them. And they write as if they are basically academics. Like Rebecca Walker, who is the daughter of the woman who wrote The Color Purple. She's the one who coined the term third wave. And if you read her work, I don't know how academic she actually is, but she comes across very, very, very bright and has great ideas and stuff. So I don't really see that demarcation is that important, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay. That's good to know for people out there who, might want to disparage certain authors because they're not published in a journal or by a publishing house that's associated with a university.
Yeah.
So now we've kind of got your feminism sort of background there, and moving on to atheism. Were you raised in a family where it was non-religious, or was it something that you came to?
I was, but I did sort of flirt with Christianity in my early teens, because I was the kind of person at that point who just wanted to belong, wanted to be part of a group, and I was going to a Christian school at the time of my own choosing. But I quickly sort of realized that there's not a lot of, depth to a lot of that stuff. And then you keep hearing the same answers to your questions, like God works in mysterious ways or just dodges and stuff. So I basically became a Christian at 12 and then an atheist at 15. and I went through a period where I was quite anti-theistic, and me and my friends would go into Christian chat rooms and harass them and stuff and make fun of them. But I quickly sort of learned that that's not productive and it's not a good thing to do. And ever since then, I've been sort of in favor of religious tolerance, tolerance of religious people, and being realistic about that. Like, I despise people like Richard Dawkins who say things like, oh, you can't be intelligent and religious at the same time. I just think that that's absolute nonsense, And so, yeah, I am, while I am an atheist, I really dislike, well, I should actually say I'm not, the term I use is atheist, which is sort of a half agnostic, half atheist sort of. The position is that we don't take a position on whether God exists or not, or gods exist or not, but practically speaking, there's no evidence for the existence of any deities, so you might as well conduct your life as if they don't exist, because that makes more sense than conducting it as if they do exist. Right. So that's my stance. Yeah, I don't, I think just trying to say that there isn't a God, which is not what most atheists do, but some of them do that. And I think that's just as silly as being religious. Yeah, so the other thing is, I've never read any books about atheism, because it's something to me that you can sum up in a few words, disbelief in gods. So I don't really understand why people would write whole books about it. It seems kind of weird to me.
Yeah, but though I think it makes a lot more sense if you grow up in a worldview and you have no idea how to think about things other than from a supernatural point of view. It helps to maybe have somebody who has the opposite worldview to give you an insight. But if you're kind of leaning that way anyway, like, well, I don't need, like, I'm already convinced.
Yeah, that makes you make a great point, that those books might be more aimed towards people who were brought up in a non-secular household, to sort of break them out of certain modes of thinking about things. Yeah, okay, I get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I have on the various things of things that I'd like to do if I had enough hours in the day is, a book that kind of really explains why I don't think you can be a Christian feminist. I think you can be a Christian, and I think you can be a feminist, but I don't think you can put like Christianity and feminism together, because the texts simply don't support that position. You have to go outside the Bible. And I think, that kind of writing.
I think you can be like a monotheistic spiritualist, someone who believes in God, but if taking part in organized religion doesn't make sense to me from the point of view of a feminist, because those power structures have been put in place to put down women in minority groups, and they advocate slavery and wife beating and all kinds of horrible things. So yeah, I think you can believe in God and be a feminist, but to take part in organized religion makes no sense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, you said in your video with Armoured Skeptic that you discovered the YouTube atheist community at a certain point in time. So I was wondering if you could maybe take me through that, your interaction with the internet in general on feminism as a topic, and then how you came to YouTube and how you found the community.
There was something I was going to bring up in describing my history with feminism that I totally forgot about, which is that earlier last year, I was a moderator on Anti-feminism, the biggest feminist community on Reddit. And well, even though it's tiny, feminism doesn't have a big community on Reddit. It's about 50,000 users, and compared that to the men's rights in Red Pill, which is 300,000 combined. So I was a moderator of that group, and that was my first sort of foray into being a feminist on the internet. And it was horrible. It was a horrible experience. Every day you were banning 20 people who just flooded into them to just derail conversations and use the same arguments over and over again, and ignoring all evidence and ignoring people's rebuttals, and just really being a nuisance and not trying to contribute anything worthwhile at all. And so you're just constantly banning people. I must have banned like 200, they would make new accounts and just come back in and say some other stupid, annoying things. And that was really it. That experience really sort of showed me how dire the situation really is on the internet. Yeah, so that was, I think I ended that a few months before I started my channel. And that experience really sort of formed the way I think about feminism on the internet quite a lot. To be very suspicious of people who call themselves anti-feminists and the kinds of arguments, the kinds of tactics they use.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a very good point to bring up in terms of the the way that, yeah, the way that feminists are targeted in terms of people seek them out to, start instigating things and poke at things. And yeah, it's meant to be hostile and to create a feeling of you just don't want to take the abuse, so you don't say anything, which is ironic because one of the big arguments against feminism is that they're trying to police speech or control speech. And yet the people who are complaining the loudest are all the ones who are saying, well, don't talk about this, don't bring this up, you're wrong, shut up, go away.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like the person who's made the most comments on the Armoured Skeptic video is an anti-feminist, who just trundles into every comment thread and makes his same argument that he's made in every other comment thread. And it's just really sort of surprising how obsessive they are, how many, and they all subscribe to Jenny McDermott and Kevin Logan and just constantly bombard their comment threads with the same tired old talking points over and over and over again. And yeah, it's really surprised me because that idea of following all these people you disagree with and subscribing to their channels, I've never really understood why you'd do that. I get it on Twitter, like you'd keep track of the sort of stupid things people say, but to actually subscribe to people's channels and watch all their videos, it just makes no sense to me at all. It'd be like sitting around watching Fox News all day or something. I don't know.
Yes.
I know some people do that as kind of a sort of masochistic type thing or something.
Force, entertainment, kind of like a way to pass the time. I just think it's, for me, it's like, well, you have anything more positive to do? This is really how you spend your life, is hours and hours of, coming up with, writing the same arguments on a series of different videos. That's how you spend your days. But so you were on the Reddit thread, and then you discovered the YouTube atheism community, and that was something for you, like it was new. Do you remember initially who you started with watching and why?
The very first YouTube atheist I came across was Jacqueline Glenn. I think her videos just sort of popped up in my recommendeds at some point for some reason. Oh, I know why. It's because I've been watching Matt Dillahunty's channel, Atheist Experience. And just one of her videos came up into my comment. And then I found Thunderfoot and Sargon of Akkad. Even I don't think Sargon of Akkad is an atheist, but he came up next. And then the MRA anti-feminists sort of side started to, I started finding out about that. And then I sort of found two channels that sort of acted as chroniclers of the history of YouTube atheism, which was Straight Dope and Dick Coughlin. And they both did a lot of videos about how it had developed over time, and their channels went back here. Well, Dick Coughlin's had a lot of different channels, but he re-uploads his videos. And so, I found how the community fractured into these multiple different sort of groups. You could say it fractured into three groups, which is the ones that went off and hated feminism, the ones that went off and hated Muslims, and the ones that went off and hated those other two, basically. Yeah. And obviously I aligned myself with that third group, definitely. And so that's how I found it. So when I say good and bad trends, those were the other two major trends I was talking about, the Islamophobic trend and the strong dislike of Islamophobia and anti-feminism trend as well.
Right. And then, so when you started watching channels, what are the channels that you enjoy the most, or at least subscribe to keep up to date? Or, what are the things what are the channels that you watch on a regular basis?
Well, I also am quite invested in the not being. I'm an anti-gamergator quite strongly as well. So I follow a lot of gaming channels that take that position, like Cool Ghosts and Jim Sterling and Laura Kate and those kinds of people who you could call SJWs within the gaming community. Yeah, and so I follow that sort of stuff as well as YouTube feminists like you and Kevin Logan, and also people like Captain Meikle and stuff who aren't really part of that community but are sort of friends of that community, I guess you could say. And also I've got an interest because of my particular country, which when you watch my Steve Shives video, you'll find out about this part. But my country has a quite long now history of decriminalized prostitution, and so I'm interested in sort of sex work related content as well, like a channel called Feminist Whore and Exiled. Even though I disagree with a lot of stuff she has to say, I follow those sort of people as well, because sex worker rights are something that it's been quite important to me just because of where I'm from. Yeah.
And then
trying to
when
think what
you,
else.
at some point, oh yeah, if you had more, please go ahead.
I was just going
Otherwise,
to say, Young Turks Network is another thing I'm quite interested in. Yeah, progressive channels and news content, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
that sounds, yeah, a lot of that sounds familiar and some of it sounds new. So I'll have
yeah,
to go check out some of your channels that you recommend. So at some point, you must have made the decision, I need to have a channel and I need to start making some videos. And so can you tell me a little bit about that time of when you went from being a viewer to making the decision to start creating videos, and then maybe through the process of deciding what your content was going to be like?
yeah. So my friend and I, he operates the channel Demotivator Opinion. We both decided to make our channels around the same time, and we both decided on quite different approaches. I wanted to script all my videos, and he was going to do sort of off the cuff, purely opinionated, sort of not opinionated, but purely opinion based sort of off the cuff responses to things. And I was going to be more of the person who did a lot of research and writing and stuff. And so we're kind of sibling channels that tackle similar issues in different ways. And I decided to really make my channel because of the first video I did, which is my men's rights activist talking points video, because I wanted to talk about how some of their issues do have some legitimacy, or quite a lot of legitimacy, but then there's so many of them that are just sort of quite that aren't really based on if they're based on the facts, they're looking at things wrong, that they're missing out key parts of the evidence, like the custody one, for example, where if you actually look at the stats, custody decisions, the final, court orders don't really play that big of a role at all. It's like 1.5%. So yeah, that video is why I decided to start my channel. And after I made that video, I sort of started thinking, what other things can I think about and talk about? And I knew I had longer series I wanted to do, like the history of women's rights, and my series I'm about to sort of start researching, or doing a lot of moving more into heavy research for, which is my history of Islamic terrorism one, just because there's so much misinformation about those two topics, about feminism and about Islam on the internet. And so I just wanted to provide sort of some researched, fact-based sort of, like, incorporating more nuance and stuff into it. Like, new atheists and those sorts of people, they have this really sort of unnuanced, sort of really unsophisticated view of a lot of these issues. Yeah, like they just their approach to looking at Islam just really ignores like historical factors and political factors and things like that. They just don't know about. So my approach has always been to sort of try and provide information.
Yeah, great. And so that's your vision for the channel is one that kind of, it sounds like you're engaging with the three groups that you mentioned before.
Exactly.
Yeah. So on the one hand, addressing. Yeah, go ahead.
And as well as having criticism of the first two groups, I also have criticism of the third group as well, which I've actually lessened my, I've backed away from a little bit in my thinking over the last, since I made my channel, which is the sort of presence of mudslinging and, name calling and ad hominem attacks and stuff that goes on in the gender culture war. I think there's just a little bit too much of that. And my objection to it is mainly because it gives the other side ammunition, And so, but having said that, now that I've actually joined the community, I can understand it a lot more, to be honest.
Why people react that way.
Yeah, it's like that video that Kevin Logan did recently of all those chat logs. You can just see these people, like their Machiavellian sort of machinations, and like their obsessive like thinking about feminists and wanting to attack them and mess with their lives and stuff. And we're not, and feminists aren't totally free of that sort of thinking and actions as well. But yeah, I do understand it more, because it's like, you just get bombarded with the same stuff over and over again, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah, I was surprised to see my name mentioned in there, because like I came to the topic probably around October of last year now, that is the 2016, and all I've ever done is express opinions, and that is enough to get me on people's radar as a target for harassment and doxing. And these are the people who are complaining about, the policing of a community, and people who want to police the community. I think the phrase at Armoured Skeptic work was because they didn't like what was being said. And I'm like, well, right back at you, baby.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I find that objection so weird. And in the response video I'm working on at the moment, the guy says something similar. It's like people should just take being said, having offensive things said to them. They should just take it. And it's like, well, no, people should complain. People should stand up for themselves. When people say offensive things to you, you shouldn't just take it lying down. You should stand up for yourself. So yeah, I find that kind of complaint quite odd, because the people making that complaint, they're not doormats. They're people who stand up for themselves as well. So it's quite odd.
Yeah. So so far you've when did you start when was your first video put out?
My
How
first
long?
video was in early November, I think it was the 12th of November.
And how has your experience been in far as like, your growth and the comments? Like, can you tell us? Then we'll kind of go into the Armoured Skeptic response and how you saw that and wanted to plan it out. But first, just like, let's say because I think there's been, have you seen a big spike in your activities since?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So maybe talk about the pre-response experience.
Yeah, so before that, I was attracting a few sort of people who were just throwing spanners into the works and stuff, but not many. And I quickly sort of got rid of those people when they overstepped the mark and started calling other people like really horrible things and stuff. I just, block. I don't tolerate that. So yeah, I got rid of quite a few of them, but I did 3 videos in a row which were all about feminism, and those were well received. People didn't really, I wasn't getting a lot of haters and stuff. But then I did this video, Message to the Men's Rights Movement, and that spiked the haters for sure. They really flocked into my channel, going, and I kind of regretted how quickly I rushed that video out, because it was all based on my reactions to a thing that had just happened and stuff. I wish I'd taken more time to make that video, because I didn't realize that it was going to get so much attention from men's rights activists. I thought, maybe 1 or 2 might see it. I was hoping Captain Mika would see it, and he did, which was good. But there was just so many people who, because I was specifically addressing that video to the non-anti-feminists within the men's rights movement, and so many anti-feminists just flocked in, and I was just like, hit the same thing over and over again. This isn't about you. This isn't about you. Get your anti-feminist friends, if you have any, to come and comment, because I'm not talking about you. Yeah, so that was quite
maybe you can,
well,
yeah, say a little bit about what you see in terms of the men's rights movement and those sort of like the 2 groups that you sort of identified, the ones that aren't anti-feminists and the ones that are. So how do you see the internal workings of the MRM?
I think pretty much everyone within the men's rights movement cares about their issues to some degree, but I think a lot of them care more about attacking feminists, to be honest. I think attacking feminists is their bread and butter, and that they have these issues they sometimes talk about, like A Voice for Men. They barely ever mention the actual activist causes anymore. They just go on about how bad feminists are. And I think, they do have some, good points about feminists trying to derail their conferences and stuff to a degree, but that sort of rhetoric puts people in power off from taking part or getting involved. Like, I was talking about Amnesty International, who don't want anything to do with the men's rights movement because of the anti-feminism, and the Southern Poverty Law Center calling A Voice for Men a hate group. That really doesn't help at all. And I think, I wish that they would move away from that, because they would actually be able to get some legislation passed if they did that, and a lot of their issues do need legislation, because they're at that point in their sort of feminism to a degree has moved past needing to focus on legislation. Now it's more about socio-cultural change and social consciousness and stuff. There is some legislation that people want to pass still, but I think a lot of it isn't about that anymore. Whereas the men's rights movement is at the sort of legislation phase. They need to get laws passed about sentencing ending the gender disparity between sentencing. Men get sentenced for longer for the same sorts of crimes and stuff. So they really need to get into the corridors of power and sway the authorities to look to being part of their group, or not to caring about their causes. And that's not going to happen anytime soon. I think it really isn't.
Not with the current approach that people in the movement have in terms of what activism means, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you can't set up an activist group that's mainly centered around being against another activist group. That doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Yes, I would agree. And, that's why I commented recently, the Skeptic Feminist mirrored one of your videos. And I commented that I don't see a piece of legislation that the MRM can point to say, we rallied our members to put pressure on politicians to get this passed. And as I've also pointed out in comment sections of other places, that, look, the MRM is basically playing identity politics here.
Indeed.
And their identity is perfectly mapped onto the identity of men who hold political power. So their access to the corridors of power are easier than anybody else's, because they just need to walk in to say to these, middle and upper class, usually white men, and I think it's the movement seems to be a lot of white guys, and say, look, our problems are your problems. You need to start saying this and do something about these, because you have a responsibility to represent men. And yet I don't see any evidence of them doing anything remotely close to that.
A few MRAs have pointed out to me that they've made some progress on like state or local level sort of legislation, but I don't know of any single like national level legislation that they've accomplished.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right, they're white males talking to white males, so they should have a pretty easy time. And not just that, but the research that their movement's based on, like that sentencing one, for example, there's really good data. There's been some great studies, including one by a woman, by the way. The most respected one was actually by a woman. But anyway, yeah, they've got the data. All they need to do is point to that and go, look, this is a serious issue. It's been totally, this is confirmed by academics. This is a real thing. But yeah, it should be easy, but it's not happening.
There's also one thing that I think I often think about when I see the term men's rights movement, and I compare that to the women's liberation movement. And the thing is, they're defining themselves as a rights-based movement, whereas women's liberation dealt with women's socioeconomic, political, all of these spheres, private and public and whatnot. And so if you're going to be a rights movement, then it seems to me that your movement really should be centered on law and changing laws.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. And like, there was an earlier version of the MRM in the 70s and 80s called the men's movement. And that was way better. I mean, they had anti-feminists within that too, but I don't think they were the majority, at least not in I've studied a little bit about the British men's movement, and they didn't seem to have a lot of anti-feminism. In fact, a lot of them were quite allied with feminists because they sort of recognized that, well, these women have passed legislation. They've got decades of experience in making actual change. Let's listen to them. Let's cooperate with them and get some sort of strategies from them about how to get that stuff done. But these days, yeah, it's just all about alienating feminists and drawing a line in the sand and saying us and them and stuff. So yeah, I think,
it's entertainment. So, yeah. I think it's entertainment masquerading as activism.
And I think a lot of it has to do with the way that YouTube and Patreon are set up, because if you launch into a thing that has a lot of populism on the internet, like anti-feminism, your view count skyrockets. There's a great interview with Sargon of Akkad where he talks about how when he got into the Gamergate thing, his subscriber base just spiked massively. I think it tripled. And yeah, it's pretty, you think about it from their point of view, it must be pretty hard to stop talking about that stuff after that. He's actually earning a living off that now. And it's like with Thunderfoot, he doesn't do that many science videos anymore because that doesn't earn him as much money. So, and Jacqueline Glenn, same thing there. If she someday decided to, I'm a feminist now, screw this, I'm going to start making videos that are pro, she would just lose her audience. So I think they have a sort of economic investment in keeping that going, and that sort of ends with them just pandering, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's why channels like yours and what I hope would be mine, which would be the counter to that, where when people go looking for a video about feminism, it's not just going to get all returns of anti-feminist comments or videos or whatever else. You actually get some people in there doing more educational things and evidence-based things, and you can't find that content if nobody's making it.
Oh, even worse is Gamergate, I think, because if you search on YouTube, if you put in Anita Sarkeesian, Brianna Wu, or Lee Alexander, the first 50 results are all people just attacking them, and you have to actually search quite hard to find videos that are either made by them or in favor of them. It's quite ridiculous. Like Lee Alexander in particular, I don't think she's said that much controversial stuff. She's just a woman in the gaming industry who wants to make some changes to the way the gaming industry operates and stuff that are all for the better. But she just gets, so attacked. And I find it really sort of annoying that you shouldn't have to, on any topic, you shouldn't have to search that hard to find things that are in favor of that.
Yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with, yeah, the kind of discourse that's accepted and promote, you know, the kinds of audiences that respond to things on YouTube, and also content creators tactically creating content in order to get a lot of views in order to make the money, versus people who are interested in, I don't want to say integrity because that makes it sound like we're morally superior, but insofar as I want evidence-based claims, I want people to click on links and read reports. You do the same, you know, when you make a, you know, you're doing a response video, you're checking things, you're taking your time with it because you want it to have an educational component, not just an emotional component. And there's I think there's a big difference between emoting, which is what I tend to see anti-feminists do in my comments. Even if I have questions in my videos saying, please answer these questions, they'll just come and emote and not put any links to any evidence, just, I'm angry.
And I think, you know, I have responded to a lot of the people making comments on my videos that are they have critical things to say, but they're framing it in a sort of non-attack based way. And, you know, I find that quite productive, whereas a lot of the anti-feminists just come in, they ignore all the things you've said that they might agree with or find some value in, and just go on the nitpick, you know, just go on these tiny little aspects of it that the single things that they found problems with, and don't acknowledge any of the good stuff you said, and just sort of start attacking you. And I automatically just sort of tune out to that, because like, oh, this person just wants to have a go at me. You know, they don't want me to actually change the way I operate or anything. They're just looking to attack. So, but anyone who actually seems to want for me to improve my content in some way, I listen to them. I take them their views on board, especially if a lot of them, those sorts of people, are saying the same things. And yeah, you know, as I said, I'm not a person with a degree in feminist studies, so I'm going to get stuff wrong every so often, and I definitely want that to be pointed out to me. Absolutely, if I'm saying something that isn't reflecting the feminist reality, I want that pointed out for sure.
Yeah, I think that's also a difference between people who are more committed to the truth than an ideology, is that they'll say, you know, if I'm wrong, bring me evidence. I'll amend my views. I'm data led, or if I don't have this quite right and someone can correct my misunderstanding, then that improves my content, rather than dogmatically drawing a line in the sand and refusing to accept any new evidence because it doesn't conform with your worldview.
Yeah, and I think the other part of it as well is that there's a difference between different types of research and evidence. Like, some evidence is really easy to find, and some evidence is really esoteric and hard to find. And if somebody asks me for evidence they could find for themselves in a quick Google search in 15 seconds, I'm not going to take them seriously. You know, because if they really wanted to know, they could have easily just done that themselves. And most people do that themselves if they want to know something. But yeah, then there's types of evidence that are really quite hard to find and hard to source. And those sorts of things are the things I really want to know if I'm getting wrong. For sure.
Well, one of the things that frustrates me as someone in academia is that my research is so often hidden behind paywalls. And it annoys me because the research that I was doing, that I published, was funded by the taxpayers. And my salary when I was doing that work was paid for by the students or the taxpayers. And so why then it should go to a company that gets to put it behind a paywall and profit? I don't ever see a dime from any of the articles that I write. Right. So why should they be making money selling back to universities and the public the research that their tax dollars have paid for? It doesn't make any sense to me.
There was I think it happened in the 50s and 60s where a lot of universities were sort of corporatized. And, you know, a lot of them were like MIT is a great example where Chomsky talks about how in the past they were publicly funded and everything was really open and everyone was talking to each other about their research. Whereas now that it's privatized and sort of controlled by big money lenders, corporations, everything's all hush hush. Nobody talks to each other anymore. Everything's very secretive and stuff because everything's got to be profitized, you know, turned into something that can earn somebody some money. Yeah.
It's really depressing. So I guess it's time maybe to talk about your the big response video that I think you cracked 1,000 on that one within a few days, and
Kevin Logan mirrored it, and I think between the two of our versions of that video, I think it's up near just before 3,000 views now, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's been up for like a month, or not a month, sorry, like a week or so.
Yeah, that's right. It took me about a month to make that because well, originally it wasn't going to be anywhere near as long as it was, but I just, I couldn't move past something like, when he talks about patriarchy being impossible to prove, I couldn't just say, no, it is possible to prove and move on. I had to actually go out and show him just how many, like the most basic sociology textbooks, when you do like first year sociology, they hand you 3 textbooks, and they all of them mention patriarchy as something falsifiable.
Yeah. So
it's
can we start at the beginning? I'm gonna interrupt you because I want you to say that like as part of a longer answer. So yeah, I guess what I noticed and got really frustrated about in terms of the Armoured Skeptic video is that when I watched it, he was, if it had been a creationist saying all of those things about evolution, he would have made a video destroying all of his weak arguments. And one of the things too, as I watched it through, is I wish he would have dung a bell every time he made a fallacy and kept a little count in the corner, like CinemaSins. Because I think, I think you said, is this the logical fallacies Olympics at one point? But can you talk a little bit about when you saw the video, how long you took to decide to make a response, and then the process of making a response, and then we'll talk about the reaction after.
Yeah, well, I don't subscribe to his channel, so the first time I saw that was in Jenny McDermott's response to it, and I liked a lot of the things she said in her response, but I thought there were things that he said that she just sort of didn't respond to, that needed responding to, like she called him out on his insisting that atheism have this really strict definition, but then feminism have this really broad definition, and not accepting the strict definition of feminism and stuff. She called him out on that and a lot of other things he said, but I thought, he's also saying these things that are totally inaccurate. So I felt somebody's got to call him out on this, and it's not going to be Jenny McDermott because she's already made her video. So I thought it should be me. And my sibling channel, Demotivator Opinion, he made a response to it as well. And so I think, and my one took a lot longer than either of theirs because I just kept adding to it and adding to it. And I wanted to do the entire video as well, whereas they, understandably, for the 28-minute video, decided not to do the whole thing. Whereas I was like, I'm going to see this through to the end. I don't care how bad it gets. Yeah.
So yeah, can you take us through a little bit about, not necessarily in deep detail, but like how you watched it through and made notes and then started to make counter arguments and then back it up, or what was your process of kind of deconstructing his video in order to construct your own?
Well, I watched it, the first time I watched the whole thing through, I did it while recording my off-the-cuff responses, and then I basically went through and replaced almost all of them with a scripted version that was better written and had more research behind it and stuff. And then I started just taking screenshots of the things I was researching and screen caps and bringing in, like I did a lot of research into who's writing about patriarchy, what kind of books are being written about it. And with the rape culture one, I'd actually already read most of those books. So that was, I'd read Asking for It and I read Rape is Rape a while back. And so, and I watched those 2 documentaries. And so, I didn't, some of the things I needed to do quite a lot of research for, other things as well I sort of already done the research for. But I just kept sort of thinking, I tried to think of every single way people could refute what I was saying or have a problem with what I was saying and trying to counteract that. Like I was careful not to well poison. I tried not to do any straw man arguments, which people did point out I had sort of done. Well, I'd taken everything he said on face value in terms of the wording he used, and some people had a problem with that, which I thought was legitimate. But I tried not to straw man him. I tried not to ad hominem attack, his character rather than his arguments and stuff. And I was quite careful with the way I wrote it, so people couldn't. I tried to minimize the sort of angles that people could take to attack my claims, my arguments. People still did it, of course. I was a bit naive about that, really. People are always going to find something.
They're always going to find something to complain about. Yeah, that's definitely true. And so you put it out, and was the reaction about what you expected, more than you expected? Also, I'm just there's some background noise for me, so I've been muting myself to try to stop that. I'm going to close my window, right. But you go ahead and start. So if you see me like reaching over,
which was, I don't know if you heard that, but my dog was growling at something happening outside the house. But I knew it was going to bump up my subscriber base a bit and get me more views than normal, but I didn't realize quite how much it was going to get. I knew because of the amount of effort that I'd taken into it, that it was going to have, going to get more views than anything I'd done up to that point. But it was definitely exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, and the comment section blew up probably more than your other videos.
I never predicted quite how much. I mean, I've I've never had, I've seen, you know, counts of like 30, 38 YouTube notifications and stuff. I've never seen that before while being a YouTuber or just a, you know, audience member or whatever. I've never seen that many notifications, and just so many. I went away for a day, you know, and then came back, and then there was just so many of them. And it's like, I can understand now why YouTubers don't reply to that many of the comments they get, because man, it's impossible. You just can't.
Yeah,
So yeah, that was quite an eye-opening experience for me, that side of it, for sure.
Yeah, I had yesterday the choice of I could either spend the afternoon responding to anti-feminists in the comments or making a video.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. And yeah, I eventually basically just thought, I'm going to not respond anymore. I have to get back to my my actual why I'm here, you know. So yeah, I definitely had the same experience, and it's very exhausting, you know. And yeah, I did spend basically a whole day just doing that, you know, because you start watching it, I don't know, like I was watching some news thing or some documentary or whatever, and then you just keep getting notifications. And yeah, you just sort of have to cut it off at some point.
Yeah, I think I try to, like, in the first couple of days, make a good faith effort if people are commenting, but then at some point, in a point in time that changes depending on what my recording schedule is, I just kind of have to give up on that and move on to my new content. And it's not because, you know, like, I'm trying to be rude. I just only have so many hours in the day. And yeah, and so you had a full range of responses to that. And I was really quite impressed, actually, that you are very open to legitimate critique and constructive criticism, and taking, I think, a very charitable view of people's comments if they're obviously, you know, they're not obviously trying to troll you, to improve your videos. And I think it's a really great role model for others to have. You want to talk a little bit about your ethics in terms of that topic?
Yeah, like I said, if the people aren't just trying to attack me and ignoring anything of value I said, like if they mention that, oh, I liked most of your video, but this part I had a problem with, then I think, okay, this guy is actually has legitimate things to say. So I'd listen to those people. And if more than one person said it, then I started thinking, okay, this is definitely something I should be looking into. Then sort of thinking about, like, you know, what that people had to say about me, taking everything on face value that Armoured Skeptic said, like his use of the word all or nobody or no one and stuff like that, that he's not really saying there's literally 0 people on earth who don't believe that rape's happening, although I'm not actually sure about that one. But a lot of the stuff he said, he wasn't really meaning all people. And so, yeah, I started thinking, yeah, from now on, I think in my future response videos, I need to, if I'm going to attack that wording choice, I also need to acknowledge the fact that he might not actually mean that, and mention that as well. Yeah.
Do you think that by having, for me, what it really is having the mirror of what an atheist, anti-feminist who often critique creationists, the comments and the worldview that they use to apply to creationist argument, we're basically just holding up the mirror to them and saying, yeah, you're using the same tactics that you're criticizing in other people. Do you think that now that there are increasing numbers of people who are challenging that straw manning and the basically creationist-like tactics of anti-feminists, that it's going to raise their game, that it's going to force them to actually go into the world and look for evidence and substantiate their arguments rather than just cast aspersions and mischaracterize what people are saying?
I have to hope so, because otherwise I probably would just shut down my channel. I have to believe that that will happen, because I think that, yeah, I think that was lacking a little bit in the YouTube feminist community. And I think the more we can get of that, like you had your channel and you've always relied on trying to source evidence and provide real information and stuff. So I've always respected that. But I think there needs to be more channels like that. But I think, you know, people like Kevin Logan, they have a place for sure. Like he opened my eyes, his content opened my eyes to just how hateful some of these people can be, just how bigoted, how just really offensive, like intentionally offensive and willfully ignorant these people are. And so I think his videos are I think they're definitely important, but I think also there needs to be a different kind of video as well. And so that's kind of what I'm about.
Yeah, I kind of think of Kevin as like the id and you as the superego. Because there are times I watch Kevin, and it's kind of like watching when Jon Stewart would have a rant about something, and it was almost cathartic to watch somebody else channel your frustrations, and often in ways it's quite humorous. that allows you
Yeah,
to
exactly.
vicariously go, yes, this is, get it off my chest too. And then you need
Yeah,
the brain side, you need the
yeah.
the people who inspire you to think. Not that Kevin doesn't inspire you to think. I just the things that I enjoyed about his channel initially, and we had a talk recently. I know he wants to kind of diversify things that he wants to do on his channel. But yeah, the descent of manosphere, I felt like it was really needed for someone to just go and poke fun and really
Absolutely.
deflate those
Yeah.
channels and the egos associated with them a lot of the
And,
times.
I don't even think Kevin Logan doesn't even really need to interject. I think all he really needs to do in those videos is just show you what they say. Because, man, some of the stuff they say is just so out there. Like, oh, man. And, that like pure misogynistic just rhetoric that they just like. I think the two that stood out for me the most were War Corp 666 and Goodfella. Like, some of the stuff they say is just outright misogyny, just blatant women hating stuff that where they say like all women are bitches and stuff like that, or another one is Davis Oreni. He said, and they like intentionally inject words that make they're talking about all women for sure. And I think that stuff is just that somebody needs to shine a light on that and
Hate
show you
groups.
just how bad these people are.
Yeah.
And it really, one of the things I found bizarre in the comment threads of those videos is that there'll be somebody going, oh yeah, this guy's so bad, but this other guy you did a Descent of Manosphere about, he's fine. And some of them would be like, oh yeah, that War Corpse guy, he's totally bad, but Goodfella's fine. It's like, these people are basically the same. How can you think one person's all right? And I don't think any of the people he's targeted in those videos are any good. I think they're all bad. So I think, yeah, the reaction, yeah, it was not just his videos that sort of showed me how bad these people can be, but also how people have responded in his comments to the stuff they're saying. It's like, how can you watch that video and take that person's side? It just blows my mind. Yeah.
For me, I discovered Kevin's channel, and when I started out with my YouTube channel, it was pretty much focused on atheism because I felt like there weren't enough women doing videos on atheism, and in particular, and I also felt like there's a lot of baggage left over from biblical norms in secular societies that are not being properly identified as religious constructs that are no longer of use. But we're still carrying that baggage, even though we might be secular or atheist. We still have all of the values from that, and that is surrounding us, and maybe even we take in. So that was where I kind of put my critique. But increasingly, as the feminist side grew out, then the haters started to show up more and more on my channel. And Kevin was really important for me to see how the breadth of the hate that is being directed, and that there really is a need for not counter hate, but actually just rational, reasonable, evidence-based voices to stand up, so that when people go on YouTube looking for information, they have alternative content to turn to, like your channel.
I've had comments saying exactly that. People saying that, man, when I search for feminism on YouTube, all I find is these people saying these horrible things. And you're the first channel who I've found who's not saying horrible things. So thank you for that. I've literally had people say exactly that. So you're on the money with that one for sure.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that increasingly, as more voices pop up as this counter, and I guess in a lot of ways I see it as maybe, I know atheism plus is a very controversial term, but I like the idea of intersectional atheism. And that's very much of how I see my channel, and I think your channel in some ways as well, although I don't know how you see yourself in that way. But that intersectionality voice, if that community can become bigger and create better content, more content and better content to offer as an alternative to this basically sugar-driven, emotional-laden, fallacy-promoting thinking, then we'll start to attract more viewers and hopefully more channels, and it will start to balance out the content distribution.
Well, I'm a huge fan of intersectionalism, and I call myself an intersectional feminist, absolutely. And I think, especially as a male feminist, I don't know how you could be a male feminist and not be an intersectionalist. It doesn't make any sense. But yeah, I think a lot of the male feminists that I see that aren't intersectionalists, they end up saying they end up talking down to women and being quite condescending and sort of like, I read these books, therefore I know more about your, that trumps your experiences. And I think that's totally rubbish. I think as a male feminist, you need to always be watchful that you're not doing that, because that's just, it's not helpful. It's not accurate. It just ruins your own credibility. So that's another thing I wanted to mention. If anyone ever thinks that I'm doing that, definitely bring me up on it, because that's something I definitely want to avoid. But yeah, I think intersectionalism has two sort of main aspects to it, and I think only one of them really applies to atheism, because atheism is not an activist movement. So the part of intersectionalism that's all about you know, making sure you're not alienating people who are in other activist movements and uniting with other activist movements in solidarity. That part doesn't really apply to atheism so much, but the inclusive mindset of intersectionality is definitely could be a boon to atheism for sure. And, you know, letting in people of all different voices into the movement and giving them a say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think atheism is sort of like, for me at least, it's a worldview that informs so many other things. Like, it informs why I'm an ally in the LGBT movement on marriage equality and changing laws and social norms, in terms of getting rid of heteronormativity in a culture. Yeah. And that's informed by my atheism, and I don't want to see Christian privilege in law, or I don't want to see theocracy. On the same thing, on like a feminist side, I attribute a lot of the problems of in society in terms of gender and sexism and limited attitudes to biblical patriarchy. So it comes back to my atheism. So for me, it's my atheism informs a lot of my other activisms. I don't know if that actually leads it to being a form of activism, or it's merely a conduit through which my activism is mediated, or a lens through which I see my activism. Who knows?
I think to me that's not strictly part of atheism to call out like Christian orthodoxy and Islamic orthodoxy that's anti-women or anti-gay or whatever. I don't necessarily think that's a core part of what atheism is about, but it's obviously associated with atheism because the people who generally take on that kind of work often are atheists. But yeah, I think that's definitely valuable. There's so much of that, especially in America, for example. American culture is very sort of, well, it's interesting with America because they're very sort of legally secular. Like, they're much more legally secular than Britain is, for example. Britain, you know, all the shops are closed on Christmas Day, like, which is quite odd, a religious holiday where the shops are closed. But that's not the case in America, is my understanding, that even cinemas and stuff are open on Christmas Day in America. But culturally, it's not very secular at all, whereas Britain is quite culturally secular. So yeah, I think both of those things need to improve. I think American, like, man, if you hear some of the testimonies of people in the military in America, them being forced to like sign these like religious pledges and stuff, and there's things on their forms about like where there's no option to tick a box for like non-religious. You have to tick a box for Christian or Islam or whatever. There's no atheist box. A lot of that stuff I find quite troubling. It's sort of not theocratic and it's not to that extent, but it's culturally religious. Blind.
Yeah, it's a blindness to the existence of other groups. So with your response video, getting such a big response, and we were talking earlier about, you know, like Sargon touching on Gamergate, and then suddenly his audience blew up, and then feeding that audience. There is a kind of a catch-22, not catch-22, but insofar as I think I've seen in your comments, people are like, oh, are you going to do other responses? And I think that they're motivated to ask you that because you did such an amazing job with this one. Yeah. So yeah, the question is, are you going to do more response videos?
I am, but the way I look at it is this: like, before I even saw that Armoured Skeptic video, I was planning to do the response video I'm currently working on. So that one is completely separate. And the Steve Shives response I did was as a result of somebody sending me a tweet because of the Armoured Skeptic one I did. So I'm going to do 3 response videos, those 2 and this one I'm working on now. And then I'm going to move on to something different. And the way I look at it is that I'm going to do the same thing again that I did with that video. I'm going to take a subject that not many people talk about and do it in a very thorough way that's going to take me quite a long time to do. And hopefully people will say the same thing. Oh, you need to do more videos like this, you know? That's the way I look at it. And it's the same, like I did 3 brief analysis videos. I'm going to go back to doing more of them at some point. Then I'm going to do 3 response videos. And so I'm going to move on to something else. Yeah.
So yeah, tell us a little bit about then your plans for the channel for 2016, because it sounds like you've got a long to-do list.
I do,
and you're going to be around for a while.
And I'm going to work on 2 series that are going to have quite a lot of individual videos that contribute to them. I'm going to do this series called How Did We Get Here?, which is all about various bad things. Well, things I definitely consider bad. I think most people would consider. In fact, pretty much everyone considers them bad, which is Islamic terrorism. And the other one is the sort of troubled state of American democracy. So things like American propaganda systems and how effective democratic propaganda can be. You know, like Hitler, for example, praised British and American propaganda agencies and propagandism because he thought it was so good, because he didn't need to do that. He just used force. you know. And I think in democracies, you have to brainwash people. You have to make them think, you have to vote against their own interests, like people say. So I'm going to do a series about that, which focuses on people like Atwater and Edward Bernays and a few other people, Reagan, people who sort of, well, you know, like Reagan was an anti-government guy who led the government. It's pretty crazy. Like, that's very weird. Being from a non-American, like, that's never happened in my country, and I can't imagine it ever happening. Someone who says government is not the solution to the problem, government is the problem, and then taking over the government. So yeah, I think I'm going to do a series on that, and I'm going to do a series on Islamic terrorism, and then after those two, I'm going to do a series about the history of women's rights, which will be sporadic, because that's going to be a lot of individual videos, and it's going to be quite... I don't like researching that one thing for that long without sort of changing up a bit. So I'm going to do sort of some stuff about the early period, which is what I'm most interested in. So I don't need to do as much research on that because I've already done it, like Mary Wollstonecraft and people, her contemporaries. And then a couple of generations later, you had the education movement, getting women into universities and medical schools and trades like printing. There was like a school that was set up to teach women how to use printing presses and make newspapers and newsletters and stuff. So yeah, I'm going to do a series about that. And I think I'm going to slow down a bit in terms of my written content aside from those and just do things like hangouts and discussions. I've got a few, I want to do one on Gamergate, and I've got some pretty lofty ambitions with the kind of guests I want to do. Like, I'd love to get a video that has Reza Aslan on it and Glenn Greenwald and some people like that. That's obviously in the future when I've got a lot more subscribers than I do now. But I have some pretty lofty ambitions for that sort of stuff.
That's great to hear, because I'm enjoying your videos, so I want you to keep making them. And then the last question I want to ask is for people who might be thinking about doing a channel, or just other people to compare processes, about how long does it take you from like getting an idea to a video, working it up, writing it up, performing it, editing it, and getting it out?
Well, I'm quite experienced in editing, which I think is something that a lot of YouTubers aren't. And, you know, I see a lot of people who don't necessarily have good software or good hardware for that kind of stuff. I already had all that, so I'm kind of in an advantage in that way. And I've done a lot of writing in my life, so I was an advantage in that way too. But I think, it takes me about, I think if you my first few videos were 15 minutes long each. And I think, well, my first two were 15 minutes, then I did one that was 30 minutes. And those took me about a week or two for each one of those to get them together, to do the research and the writing, which I do sort of at the same time. I do a little bit of writing and then a bit more research and then rewrite that thing because I got some stuff wrong. But yeah, I think one of the things I would say is don't worry about how long it takes you to make your videos, because I think there's a fear that YouTubers have that if you go quiet for like 2 weeks, everyone will unsubscribe and no one will care about you anymore. That is not the case. Like, I went quiet for almost a month doing my Armoured Skeptic video, and nobody cared. You know, I came back and it was all fine. So that would be one thing I'd say, is that take your time with your videos. There's plenty of people out there doing like off the cuff videos. There's enough of that, I would say. Take some time, think about and build up a long list of things you want to cover, so you can sort of plan well in advance. And then, you know, then you can sort of, as current events happen, you can sort of shift around. I was going to do my Islamic terrorism thing way down the line, but then Paris happened, and there's been a spike in Islamophobic activity with Donald Trump and stuff like that. So then I've moved that way up in my list of priorities. So I think that's quite a good sort of strategy to have as well, is build up a lot of things you want to do, so then you can sort of move that list around and change based on what's happening in the world. Yeah, I think those would be the two main things I'd say, is don't be worried about losing your audience because you haven't put anything out in a while, and don't be worried about and be prepared.
Yeah, be prepared. That's always a good one. Yes. And that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So know where you're getting your claims from.
Yeah. And I'm not, and the two of us aren't the only people in the YouTube feminist community who take their time. Like, I can't imagine how long it takes Kevin to make his Descent of Manosphere videos. And I don't have very much patience for trawling through that kind of content. It takes me ages, like, to just, like, I get in the right mood where I think I can tolerate some Sargon of Akkad for 15 minutes. And then I'm like 5 minutes into it, I'm like, oh, this is creeping me out. It's so sort of badly researched and badly argued. And the stuff he's saying is so, like, obviously not true. And so, yeah, I think bless people like Kevin who can just sit through that stuff and just not be just, you know, not impulsively turn it off, you know, after 30 seconds or whatever. Yeah, like John Horse and people who just sit there hour after hour of watching these terrible people.
That was my comment to Kevin, was like, you know, you're really taking one for the team there. Because I asked, how long does it, you know, how many hours do you watch? He's like, hours and hours and hours to get the footage. And I was like, you are such a trooper. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because it means I don't have to. I just get all of the horrible bits without having to sit through the bits between the horrible bits, which are also horrible. But
yeah, I did a video recently. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I did a video recently about a single tweet that Sargon sent out, and that one was annoying enough to do, you know, because I had to find that tweet. Me and my colleague, Demotivator, we talked about doing that video, and then I didn't bother to screen cap it at the time. So I had to go back a few days later through all of his stuff and find that tweet. And that experience was too much for me, you know, going through and just seeing all this stupid stuff he was tweeting about, like, let alone like watching hour after hour of his videos. So yeah, totally take my cap off for people like Kevin and Logan and John Horst, the patience that they have, is the stoic nature of them just being able to sit through that stuff.
Right up there with Marcus Aurelius. So I don't think that, I have to ask, just because I think it's interesting, you chose this shield for your channel avatar, and I was curious as to what it is, and this has seemed the perfect opportunity to ask.
Well, yeah, because I think one of the things, the first thing I got interested in, because I've always been really interested in history, the first thing I got interested in researching about feminism was the history of it, because it was a thing my mum was really into. So I thought, you know, I should learn about the background of this stuff. And so, you know, I read Wollstonecraft and I read all of them. And that early phase, which not many people know about, pre-suffragette phase, is why I chose, like, the painting I use of Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, and a lot of the women whose portraits and photos I use, well, not really that many photos, but a lot of the portraits are from that era of the the early to late 19th century, sort of, and especially the mid 19th century. And yeah, the reason I chose that stuff is because a lot of people don't know about the really early history of the women's rights movement. And the crest, the symbol I chose is the crest of Girton College, which was the first ever higher learning institution that accepted what was women only, but just the first one to accept women. And that was at Cambridge University. That's still around. Girton is now co-ed. It went co-ed, I think, in the 70s. But it was the first ever place where women could go to university in the world. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
And then I think I had a quick question that I was going to ask, and now I can't remember what it was, which I'm really disappointed with myself. But I guess saying that, because we've gone over an hour, so I hope I'm not keeping you from anything that you were otherwise going to be doing. But is there anything that we've discussed that you wanted to bring up that we haven't had a chance to talk about, or kind of before we wrap things up here?
Well, I did want to touch on, because any YouTuber, I think I've noticed, and with my own channel and with other people's channels that don't put themselves on camera, you get asked about why you don't do that. And so I wanted to bring that up. And you know, one of the reasons is because of this microphone I use, because I have worked in the field of audio recording, and I've got a lot of microphones and stuff, so I'm quite fussy about my audio quality. And so I use this, which is a cardioid microphone, which is designed for picking up the human voice. And I just thought it would be a bit weird if somebody was like holding a microphone in all their videos. That's one of the main reasons that I don't appear on camera. And also because I'm more of a behind the scenes kind of person, rather than, like, when I record my scripts, I do so many like retakes of all the things I say, because there's so many stumbles over my words and messing up mid phrase and stuff. So that's the reason why I don't appear on camera, because there'd be so much chopping up of editing and stuff. Like, I showed Demotivator one of my I showed him a screenshot of one of my in the editing software I use, of all the different how many edits I'd had in my audio, and there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. In the Armoured Skeptic videos, probably 1,000 cuts in the audio throughout that whole thing. I have to do every single one of those myself. So that's one of the reasons why they take so long. But yeah, so I just wanted to talk about that. It's not because I'm shy, and it's not because I'm wanting to hide my identity. Like Kevin said recently in that drama one he did about how he knew he was going to get doxxed eventually when he joined I kind of feel the same way. Like, it's pretty much guaranteed someone's going to come after you. So it's not because I'm trying to hide who I am, and it's not because I'm shy. It's because of the microphone thing and because of how much audio editing I end up doing. Those are the reasons why I don't appear on camera.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, but I also had the same resign myself to the fact that, yeah, if I started to talk about feminism on YouTube, that eventually I would be targeted. And I decided, I guess, that reminds me of what I wanted to say, which was, when you're looking back at the history of the suffrage movement, or before the suffrage movement, the women's rights movement, before it really focused on suffrage and somehow became defined as only a suffrage movement, the women's movement before that, when I saw some anti-feminist propaganda about denying women the vote, it made me realize that the women and the men at that time who were fighting for women's equality were facing the exact sort of same attitudes and
that's a good point, because that's one of the things that, you know, people say, oh, I don't object to previous feminist movements, I just object to third wave. You know, that's the same thing people have been saying since anti-feminism began, you know, and before the women's rights movement began. People have just been saying, oh, it's this particular thing I object to about women, you know. And I think that's really interesting, because the same kinds of tactics and arguments have been around the whole time anti-feminism's been around. The derailing, the diversion tactics, the straw men, that stuff's always been around. I think it's gotten less violent. You know, people used to throw rocks at second wavers and they used to murder suffragettes and stuff. That doesn't happen so much anymore, if at all. But, you know, so it has changed, and it's gone more online, obviously, where people are less in danger than they are out in the open. But yeah, the same kinds of mindset has always existed throughout anti-feminist, you know, reactionary sort of people. And I think when it first started, because as I mentioned, the first thing that feminists or the women's rights activists focus on was education. You know, women. Mary Wollstonecraft talks about a lot of stuff in her book, but she really focuses on getting women into universities. Because one of the things she wanted to prove, and at the time this was just a theory of hers, this is a hypothesis she had, which was that women aren't dumber than men. That was literally what her book is based on, this idea, this radical idea that women aren't dumber than men. And she said, it's just that they're less educated. That's really all it is. And she had so much pushback against that idea that so many people just thought, no, women are dumber. And not just men, women thought that. Right. Everybody thought that. And so, yeah, I think that it gets more refined and it gets less violent, but it's the same thinking that's always been around. It's the same sort of tactics.
Yeah, and I think that there's also been women who have been anti-feminist for various cultural reasons that they were brought up in their worldview in terms of seeing men as, you know, dominant or superior or natural leaders or whatever else, or not recognizing the arguments of the feminist critique. And so maybe, I don't know if you're going to track the kinds of reactions that were given or created as a response to those early, you know, feminists in your court, in your series?
I hadn't considered doing that, and as you mean, as part of my history of women's rights videos, I hadn't actually considered doing that. But now that you've mentioned it, I think I will at least make some time for that, because it's important, I think, for people to know that anti-feminism's always been around and is, you know, always had the same sort of stuff, the same rhetoric. Yeah, it's basically, you know, that your argument's wrong because of no evidence on my part, just is wrong. You know, women aren't just as smart as men; they just are dumber. I don't have anything to back that up, but it's just I'm going to assert that that's the case.
Yes,
that's what they said in Mary Wollstonecraft's day.
Yeah, or women in men's brains are different because we assume they are, but actually when you start to look at the science, no, they're not.
Yeah, well, at the worst, the most you could possibly say in the direction of the anti-feminist argument is we don't know enough yet. That's as far as you can go. You can't factually say that people think it's biologically determined, or even sort of that there's predispositions. The most you could possibly say is there's not enough evidence yet. But really, the evidence does seem to point towards that the brains are basically pretty similar. Yeah, that the hormonal differences aren't enough to really justify the cultural differences we have. Like women not being engineers. There's nothing in women's brains. As far as the research seems to indicate, there's nothing in women's brains that goes, engineering's dumb. You know, that doesn't happen.
Math so I think it's all hard.
Yeah. I mean, that's right. Yeah. And, you know, people used to say this sort of stuff about black people. Well, you know, to a degree, they still do. It's like, oh, black people don't like this because of their brains. You know, that's what's called scientific racism. And it's been around as long as science has. People trying to use science to cynically make a sort of hateful argument.
Yeah. Or to biologically justify the dominance of white males' power structures.
Yeah. And I think that is, to a large degree, that is what anti-feminism's about, is just maintaining the status quo. It's like, oh, these women want to change our society. It's like, yeah, well, these feminists want to change our society. It's like, yeah, we do. Actually, I'm going to be completely honest, we do. So yeah, if you're a conservative or you want to conserve the status quo, we are coming after you, basically.
Yeah. I had thought about making a video saying that anti-feminists should be out there promoting the Equal Rights Amendment, because if equality has already been achieved, it would be the perfect way to demonstrate that society doesn't need feminism. Is to go out and pass equal rights amendments, or in law in the United States and everywhere else, to put that into law, across the board, and then, because there should be no change if equality has already been achieved.
Yeah, because if legislation's all it took. And there's a funny one actually in that regard. People bring up the Equal Pay Act. It was like, well, no, the gender thing, the pay gap doesn't exist because of the EPA. I was like, well, no, what about the Lilly Ledbetter Act that Obama passed? If you care so much about the Equal Pay Act being important, why don't you care about the Lilly Ledbetter Act? There was just as much congressional support for both of those things. Although, I mean, it was more partisan nowadays because of the state of the Republican Party. But yeah, it was felt just as necessary to make one as it was to make the other. So how can you say that the Equal Pay Act was really crucial and important and made all this change, but then the Lilly Ledbetter Act was irrelevant and didn't need to happen? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'd like to do, again, if I had time, because I have so many videos I want to make, is to do how to fix the wage gap and look at things like paid maternity leave or paid parental leave in the States would go a long way. Paid sick leave would go a long way. Wage transparency. You can engage in a lot of policies that will redress the earnings and the wage gap very easily without having to bring down men's salaries to make them equal with women. And this is another thing I think the anti-feminists do, is that they object to the concept without even really engaging with what the solutions are.
That's a good point. And, that's one of the reasons why, because I'm quite engaged with American politics. And that's pretty common with people around the world, because I think people realize that American politics has a big impact on the rest of the world. There was some comedian at some point who said that Arabs should get to vote in the American elections because it affects them.
So much.
One of the reasons why I'm engaged with it is because I really want them to get the same sorts of stuff we have in my country. We have paid maternity leave. We have 4 weeks of that, 4 weeks of sick leave, and mandated by law. And we used to have tuition-free university, but we lost that sadly. And we used to have paid election funding, and we sort of are in the process of having that compromised as well. Universal healthcare. I basically just want Americans to have the same thing the rest of the world has.
Yeah, the rest of the developed world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I was thinking about doing an international examination of the wage gap, across countries, because it's not just an American thing. It actually exists everywhere, which again is something that anti-feminists don't always seem to acknowledge in their discussions. They treat it like it only is a problem in America because feminists are complaining about it, whereas it's a global phenomenon. And then look at how countries rank, and then look at where the countries where the gap is the lowest, and look at the policies and go, hey, you know what? It's a policy issue, not so. Yeah, I think that there's.
I think it will always be around because of the pregnancy thing. So that thing just on its own, and the fact that women sometimes make decisions not to go back to work. That will always mean there is some sort of gender gap, but you can certainly reduce it. And you can look at things like mainland Europe. I think where gender equality is at is closest. I think there was a graph I saw that said Sweden is like 1 to 1.13, whereas the state of Georgia is 1 to 6 or something like that. And it's just way off the charts, and they're comparing themselves to the Nordic model. I think if you look at those sorts of countries, I think they're the closest. They're the most advanced in terms of gender equality. If you look at the statistics in those sorts of countries and the laws they pass in those sorts of countries, then yeah, definitely we can move closer. Like my country's kind of behind those countries as well, so it's embarrassing. But we have a prime minister at the moment who just made a bunch of sexist remarks not that long ago, like about rape victims. It was just really horrible. And then you look at Canada, who has a feminist prime minister right now. So I think mainland Europe is definitely somewhere where you should look at, and if you're looking at that sort of statistics, for sure. Yeah, and that's where you are right now, right?
Yeah, I'm here in Germany, and I work for an agency that's is sort of funded by the government, so our pay is transparent. It's on a scale. It's based on seniority and very clear factors. So if you know what somebody's pay level is, you'll know what they make, because everybody at that pay level makes that amount of money. We have a very generous sick leave policy. We have paid vacation every year, so people can go out with their families and spend time with their families and not just work. And all of these things go to redressing that difference, because if you think about it, if you don't have paid sick leave, then women who disproportionately are doing the childcare in the home take time off of work in order to take care of sick kids, well then, yeah, their wages, their earnings go down as a consequence of the fact that they don't have paid sick leave. Whereas if we had paid sick leave, then moms and dads could equally split that up between who's going to stay at home with the kids, so that their earnings, wouldn't be damaged by taking care of their kids. And then you have an easy way of redressing the overall earnings gap for women, between women and men. And you get dads who then can be more of a parent in the home because they have that paid sick leave.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention, is that we don't have maternity leave here. We have paid parental leave. It applies to both genders equally. Yeah. And that wasn't always the case. We actually had to change that. It used to be just for women, and now it's for men too. Yeah. So I just wanted to quickly amend what I said before. It's actually just paid parental leave, not maternity leave we have. Yeah.
Correction noted. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of wraps up all the questions that I had. So I just think what it leaves is, what is left is to be said is, thank you so much for coming on, and also give you a chance to say hi to the current 4 viewers, or say goodbye, I should say, to the 4 viewers.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was going to mention that is because it's so late at night here, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't say you should come and watch this. I'm going to link all the people I know to watch it on your channel non-live. So there's nobody in the audience from my side of things, because I just didn't want to have to say, oh, you should watch this thing that's happening at midnight.
Yes, it's a little late to stay up. It's going to be on the internet for a long time. You can watch it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being on. And also for those of you who, this is the first time that you've been able to hear about this, go sub to the channel of Garrett. I will put a link to that in the description box below. And thank you for coming on. Thanks to everybody who's watched now and in the future. And I guess, the closing line, as I always say, is I've been Kristi, and you guys have been awesome. Thanks for watching. And I'm sure I'll be making more content in the future, because that's just kind of the mode I'm in lately. So thanks for watching, and if you kind of stick around, I'll talk to you then afterwards. So, all right, guys, see you later. Bye.